They just killed that lady right there in that car, y'all. Killed that lady in that car. Hey, was you riding with her? Did...
On October 10th, 2025, this piece of Batman with an ICE officer was posted on social media. This piece was drawn by comic book artist and writer Daniel Warren Johnson for the 2025 New York Comic Con. Let's just say it got all the internet very, very mad.
It's hilarious. This guy took a few hours to draw what he dislikes, which means he sort of likes it. Man, I really like your work. I have many of your books, but I can no longer support anyone so brainwashed and deluded. I shall be unfollowing and will not purchase another one of your products again. Understand, you won't care or probably even read this, but morality must be upheld or we're all doomed.
He is promoting violence against the men and women of ICE who are obviously in the news right now. They're being besieged in multiple cities.
Well, Daniel Warren Johnson seems to have gone and stuck his foot in his mouth.
That voted for your guy. Who's to say they even want that shit in their comic?
They are woke nightmares over there. This is about hating you. They do want you dead over there.
Yeah, I'll be canceling Absolute Batman Annual. You're entitled to your views. That's your right. But I will not support someone who is encouraging violence against real people. Why is it the ones who claim to be the most tolerant and open-minded who resort to violence first? Today's creators aren't just creators, they're activists, which makes supporting them hard as they alienate half their fan base.
Some of the discourse, I want to read a quote from the comic news site Bleeding Cool. Naturally, there has been a plurality of responses, a lot of them coming down to Batman wouldn't do this, but Absolute Batman would. That's all the discourse. It's just some comic dudes and other comic dudes arguing Batman not kill, but Batman does. No, I'm joking. That's not all of the discourse. Not really. While researching, I did kind of find certain similarities between all the arguments around this piece that I've put in a point system. Throughout this video, I'm just going to call this group of comic book nerds the comic dudes, to just make it easy when I'm talking about them. Now, the comic dudes have three different types of argument points. The first one being, why would Daniel Warren Johnson do this? With the second point being, all this piece is just DC's woke propaganda agenda / game, that old argument. Then the third and last point is how the comic dudes use pro-ICE defense. But before we go into those points, I need to explain what Absolute Batman is. Absolute Batman is a retelling of Batman's origin stories written by Scott Snyder and art done by Nick Dragotta for DC's new Absolute Universe line of comics. The Absolute Universe line of comics is basically taking all of DC's iconic superheroes and taking one iconic piece out of their origin story. Example, Superman didn't come here as a child, but as a adolescent, and his parents aren't a part of the scientific upper class, but lower class. Absolute Batman following that same exact formula, with the retelling having a Bruce that didn't grow up rich. In this version, Bruce grew up in Crime Alley, which in the Batman universe is supposed to be the ghettos of Gotham. His father, Thomas, is not a surgeon in this. He is a school teacher. His mother, Martha, is a social worker. All of his childhood friends are his rogues gallery. Catwoman, Two-Face, Killer Croc, the Riddler, and the Penguin. And the act of violence that made Bruce become Batman is not a single gunman shooting his parents down. It is a mass shooting at a school field trip at the zoo where only his father dies. Now that you have the context for Absolute Batman, we can go back to this Bleeding Cool article. If you weren't getting how ironic I was being when talking about this article, I'm sorry. But to sum up the discourse between these 2 points is stupid. But to give it its credit, there is some merit to this point here. The Batman wouldn't do this. If Daniel Warren Johnson were to draw any other Batman that was an absolute Batman, I can see how this point would in some ways be correct, because Batman doesn't really have defining politics. To give an example, I made a questionnaire on Instagram asking what are Batman's politics, with a few people giving different answers. Batman's politics are anarchism. Batman is a cop. Batman is a libertarian. But here's the thing about all these answers. They're not wrong. You could make a point for any of these answers of Batman's politics if you have good sources and examples. For example, if you tried to make a case about Batman being an anarchist or fascist and you were to say Frank Miller's Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns, or even All-Star Batman and Robin, you would be correct. If you tell me he's a capitalist that does good deeds and said New 52 Batman or about 100 different Batman properties, you're right.
Yeah, that's intentional. Number 3 is Golden Age Batman, and number 4 is Post-Crisis Batman. They're like 2 completely different Batmen.
It's confusing to a character like Batman. He is a billionaire, which sort of leaves him out of touch, though he does charity work. He's kind of like Bill Gates in that regard. He sometimes works with the cops, he sometimes doesn't and hates the cops. He fights against criminals, but in that fighting, you question what he defines as a criminal. He even questions his own morality. Batman's politics are super difficult to actually talk about. It would take me hours to even get to the surface levels of Batman's politics. So, to make it simple, Batman for almost 80 years has always been whatever the writer or fan needs him to be at that moment, with the only part about Batman not changing is how he sees justice, and how he sees justice is in extremes, or black and white. But with that thinking, it's different with Absolute Batman. He still has the defining morality, but if we were to talk about Absolute Batman's politics, it would not be confusing. If you were to think about Absolute Batman's politics on an emotional level, this makes more sense. If Absolute Batman were to see an ICE agent waiting outside the school that his late father worked at, or seeing people his mother worked with getting taken, or even worse, his friends getting killed by ICE, I don't think Absolute Batman would be happy about this. And I know talking about this is kind of a generalization, but thinking about it this way kind of helps in understanding that Absolute Batman is not like the original Batman. Now that all that information is out of the way, we can get to the actual points of the video. Also, warning, through this part of the video, I was really sick, so that's why I sound a certain way. Alright, here we go. Part 1. Points 1 and points 2. So before I go into points 1 and points 2, I just need to give a definition to DC woke propaganda first. From what I gathered in my research of DC woke propaganda, it's basically anything left-leaning. So if DC or a writer is to make an DC character who is famously white, a male, or straight into a different race, a gender, or different sexuality, or adding a character who is a different race, a different gender, or a different sexuality.
What he delivered was an 18-issue virtue signaling parade that turned John Kent into a walking pride flag.
Oh, this is Tom Taylor's face as he introduces you to more homosexuality in DC Comics.
This propaganda also, in the comic book dude's own words, causes people to basically get inspired to cause violence on someone who is an ICE officer or a police officer.
And in my opinion, the way that I see it, and art is subjective, right, is that he is promoting violence.
So with something like the Batman ICE piece, this is looked at as peak woke propaganda violence. But what's fascinating is Johnson was never really considered a part of woke propaganda comics until this piece. Johnson doesn't really write or make anything overtly political in his comics. He never even talks overtly political on social media, even talking about this fact on an interview with Comic Tropes.
I try and say as little as possible on the internet so that as little BS comes back to haunt me in any way, shape, or form. I try and let my stories speak for themselves.
Which allowed conservatives to look at his comics as if he was one of them, or if they knew he was a leftist, they were just glad that he didn't talk about his leftist views on social media. Or, I don't know, post a picture of Batman violently hugging an ICE officer. This caused a lot of backlash from his conservative supporters.
There's a lot of others out there. Jeremy Adams is a great one right now. Jim Zub is doing great work on Conan. Daniel Warren Johnson's doing amazing work on Transformers right now. These are people who are worth looking at their works. Daniel Warren Johnson is one of the most hyped people in comics, and he's awful. He hates you.
Which is why points 1, why did Daniel Warren Johnson do this? And point 2, DC's woke propaganda agenda/game is basically a question and answer. Why did Johnson do this? Oh, he's just playing the DC woke propaganda game. That's it. He's doing that. He's playing that game. He's playing that ball. Though, I know this about you. You're a smart person. I'm sure you realize this now. The comic dudes don't know what they're talking about. Johnson, in that same interview with Comic Tropes, where he talked about not overtly posting anything political on a social media, also talks about how he doesn't like when certain conservative comic groups think that he is aligned with them.
I don't like when something that really makes me angry is like when things get co-opted, just because I maybe don't say anything specific on social media or whatever. I remember like the Comicsgate people, because I didn't have any political statements in Murder Falcon and it was really fun, that they thought that I was like part of their crew. It made me so mad.
This makes the point that Johnson, in a lot of ways, doesn't want the hassle of showing his politics online, but if you were to ask him what he thinks politically, he would be inclined to tell you. He's not hiding away from that, even talking about it in certain interviews.
Then I watched the election and everything changed, and I just was very... Look, I don't hide the way I feel about... I don't think I hide the way I feel about the world. I think it's pretty clear, like, where my feelings are and how I feel about the current state of American politics, but...
I'm sure the comic dudes right now are screaming at their computer screens about how those points I made about Johnson overtly not talking about his politics on social media, but not really hiding them, is not really winning my arguments here. And yeah, maybe they're right. So yeah, to that, I'm sorry. So to backtrack on how Johnson is not playing the woke propaganda game, I need to talk about the Batman ICE piece again, but I also need to talk about its companion piece, the short story Johnson did for Absolute Batman Annual Number 1. In the summer of 2025, DC announced that Johnson would do a short story for Absolute Batman Annual Number 1. The annual coming out a few weeks after he posted this piece on his social media. The short story is in a lot of ways DC woke propaganda by the definition, but in its inspiring people to go out and cause violence onto ICE officers or police officers, it's really bad woke propaganda. So if this short story is a companion piece to the Batman ICE piece, then the short story would retroactively make the Batman Ice piece bad woke propaganda. And the only way I can really talk about that and explain it is to talk about the annual.
Part 2. The annual. The annual, if you were to go down all the definitions of woke propaganda, it would check all the boxes. Batman beats up cops. Batman beats up white racists who are trying to kick out a minority group from a town. At one point, Batman breaks the arm of a white supremacist leader before he could say white power or do the Elon Musk salute.
But why is it bad woke propaganda? Well, if we are to read the short story, Johnson is not framing these violent actions as the right solution to fix this problem. Now, I should note that this is not a both sides type of argument. There is no you should look at what the white supremacists are doing as similar to Batman, that there is a right and a wrong. No, the white supremacists are the bad guys. Please do not think differently. End of story. It's just more thinking about Batman's violent actions and if they're changing anything or just adding more violence. The short story presenting this theme in two ways. One, through a character like Father Peters who questions Batman's violent actions. Throughout the story, Father Peters tries to change things through a peaceful method. And with this, he questions Batman's own violent method. The second way the story presents this is in the first 2 pages, where we see a flashback of Thomas Wayne reading about extremist bombers. Thomas Wayne asking the question to a young Bruce about how you would stop violence, how Bruce would stop violence. The second page after this showing Absolute Batman burning down the white supremacist compound. You could read this splash page as badass, and yeah, it is a badass looking splash page, but in a lot of ways, this is to show that the extremist bombers' actions on the first page and Absolute Batman's are the same. It's even brilliant how Johnson doesn't even say who the extremist bombers are.
And I'm just like, who are the extremists, like, who are bombing people? I guess that's the Muslims, right? No. It's white supremacist extremist bombing attacks everywhere, of course.
It's even sad when you think about this first page at the end of the short story, where Batman, after burning down the compound, thinks about his father. Thinks about how his father wouldn't really agree with what he did throughout the short story. This leading to Batman crying. So, if this was just woke propaganda in their definition, all it would be is Batman beating up white supremacists and cops through the whole story. There wouldn't be this counter-argument about if this violence is changing anything. It would just be violence. It would just be what they say, woke propaganda. And in that reading, if we were to look at the Batman Ice piece, you're not supposed to think if Batman is actually changing anything by violently hugging an ICE agent. You're just thinking, is this going to cause more violence? Even Johnson brings up this exact point I'm talking about.
I feel like very human and kind of righteous anger that like kind of comes up inside of me, and at the same time, I don't know that violence is the answer. I don't think it is. This is my thought. And I needed there to be a question mark in the story. And the only way that I could figure out that there could be a question mark in the story is if Father Peters, or if there was some sort of character that was legit, that had seen some crap in the past, that is respectable, that has a dog in the fight.
And you would think a story about a radical leftist violent actions as not being the way to solve anything in the world would pique the comic dude's interest if they read this short story.
While researching, going through video after video, I found people who basically read a couple of pages, these pages to be exact.
Okay, so here comes the cops, which seems really unnecessary. Like, it couldn't just be white supremacist, right? You have to now bring the police into this, which is like saying the police are white supremacists.
Boycotted the annual altogether because this piece made them so mad that they couldn't even read the annual.
So all the points I brought up about the short story are never looked at. All their arguments against the short story coming down to Batman beat up cop, I'm mad. But here's a thought I had while thinking about if the comic dudes actually sat down to read this short story. It wouldn't really change anything. If they saw that Johnson actually wanted you to think about Batman's frustration and violence as not changing a hateful world, they're just gonna turn to these pages and argue about how they're mad that Johnson used white men as white supremacist, though it's in the name, white supremacist. Then just come back to the Batman Ice piece saying the same thing. This short story and this piece, all it is just woke propaganda inciting violence. But here's another crazy thought I had. If Johnson was to do any other character that wasn't Batman, if he were to do Wonder Woman or Superman violently hugging an ICE officer, it'd be the same discourse. In that thought, it doesn't become about Batman anymore. It just becomes more pro-ICE defense than if Batman would do this or not. Batman is taken out of the equation. But why is that the case? Why is it that someone is arguing for ICE with their superheroes? Why is it pro-ICE defense? Well, for that, I need to talk about extreme thinking or black and white thinking. Part 3. Rorschach. The only way I can actually talk about black and white thinking is I need to talk about Rorschach from Watchmen. I swear to God, this is gonna go somewhere. Rorschach is a character created by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons for their magnum opus, Watchmen. Rorschach, in a lot of ways, is Moore and Gibbons' critique on black and white thinking. Black and white thinking, or splitting, or thinking extremes, is basically someone thinking that there is a definite good and a definite evil without looking at the middle ground or gray areas. And here's the thing. I'm not saying that there is no such thing as a good or evil. There is. And it's okay to think that there is. If everyone thought in just grays or the center, there would be arguments that lead to this. Yeah, ICE is bad in what they're doing, and we need to put more restrictions on them, because I don't want to live in a country where it's not protected. That's thinking in the center. Let's not do that. But what I'm trying to get at with black and white thinking is more how it's used in harmful rhetoric, and how someone would take that rhetoric at face value. Now, let's get back to Rorschach. Alan Moore really does not like people who like Rorschach. He talks about it where he finds that people who like Rorschach like him because Rorschach reminds that reader of themselves. I want to make Rorschach. Jesus, I'm trying to do the Alan Moore impression. I can't do it. Where's H Bomber guy when you need him? I wanted to make Rorschach as like, this is what Batman would be in the real world, but I have forgotten that actually to a lot of comic fans, smelling, not having a girlfriend, these are actually kind of heroic. So Rorschach became the most popular character in Watchmen. I made him to be a bad example, but I have people come up to me in the street and saying, I am Rorschach, that is my story. And I'd be thinking, yeah, great. Could you just keep away from me, never come anywhere near me again as long as I live? That's Alan Moore for you. Though I do agree with his statement, and I will go on that in a little bit. But also, Moore and Gibbons made a very dense book with a lot of different meanings and interpretations. So, in my lukewarm defense for Rorschach defenders, anyone who comes out of the book thinking that Rorschach was right all along, there's probably reasons for that. I mean, do I need to mention the ending? But to come back on Moore's statement, he mostly means that you're not actually engaging with the critique that Rorschach represents, if you just like him in general. Rorschach is not supposed to be looked at as the same way as Batman. And if you do think that way about Rorschach, then you're just taking him at face value. Which is funny because his face is a literal Rorschach test. But to explain how taking him at face value is not good, we need to talk about the chapter The Abyss Gazes Also. So in The Abyss Gazes Also, you psychoanalyze Rorschach. You learn about his rough upbringing, how he got into being a vigilante from hearing about the Kitty Genevieve case, a true story where a woman was brutally raped and murdered. But then in the chapter, Rorschach tells you about Blair Roach. The Blair Roach story starts with a whole page of different types of information that Rorschach gives. Basically, it deals with the kidnapping of a little girl named Blair Roach. Rorschach is investigating this kidnapping, and he goes to investigate an underworld bar where he asked 15 different people where Blair Roach is kidnapped. The 15th person tells him about her being located at a dressmaker's building. Then he tells you that in this building there are 2 dogs. Now after that part, the whole few pages of Rorschach going into the building become silent. There is no caption boxes, there is no words, it is just images. In this, Rorschach goes into the building, he finds a burner where he finds a piece of a little girl's dress, then he finds meat cleavers, a chopping board, then he sees the dogs playing with a bone. This leads him to come to the conclusion that the kidnapper killed Blair Roach, burned her, and fed her to his dogs. Rorschach then kills the dogs and burns the kidnapper alive in the building. But here's the thing. Because these pages are silent, it is you, the reader, who is coming to these conclusions from the evidence. Rorschach, yes, is telling these silent pages in the story and also comes to the conclusion. But Moore and Gibbons are asking you, the reader, to judge Rorschach on if he's right or not. The other part about this that could prove Rorschach is wrong is we don't know what Blair Roach looks like. We don't know if she wore this dress. We don't even know if this is her dress. This is a dressmaker's building. This dress could have been left over from a dressmaker's fabric burning. The meat cleavers or knives could just be that, just knives. The bone could just be a bone that the dogs are playing with. This is not me basically defending a fictional kidnapper, but that coming to these conclusions is just kind of looking at it in face value. Never really thinking that maybe Rorschach is wrong for coming to these conclusions. And yes, there are parts of the story that could lead to this man kidnapping Blair Roach. He does mention her before Rorschach, but this also could be because Blair Roach is a missing person. So this man could have seen her on news sources. That's the thing. There's a lot of contraries to this case than just the man did it so he should die. Thinking that is just thinking in black and white. It's just taking it at face value, thinking this man is evil, with you thinking Rorschach, being the mass vigilante, should kill this man in the name of justice. Though, if we are thinking about Watchmen realistically, it is weird that Rorschach snuck into the man's building, killed his dogs, and burned the man alive in the name of justice. It's almost eerily similar to a group who goes to properties and locations to arrest innocent people in the name of justice. You're seeing where I'm going here. During the 2024 presidential debate against Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, Trump talked about how Haitian immigrants were taking people's pets and
they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating...
After he became president, this statement about immigrants turned into just the rhetoric of ICE. When the administration talks about ICE and what they are doing, it turns into this black and white thinking that ICE are the good guys fighting against the immigrants who are the bad guys threatening our country. It's very simple black and white rhetoric. You have a definite good and a definite evil. So if we take this rhetoric, something like, hey, ICE is waiting outside of schools and public properties. This is because they're catching the bad guys. They're going and arresting students at colleges because those students are the bad guys. Deporting an American veteran to a country he hadn't lived in since he was a little kid? Well, that's because that guy was the bad guy. Which is why, with the comic book dudes, it feels comfortable to make pro-ICE fence, because this rhetoric, this black and white thinking, is kind of similar to the thinking of defending your favorite costume superhero. Which is kind of interesting because the comic dudes use this type of rhetoric when they're making statements about how the Batman ICE piece are inciting violence. The one statement I always see from the comic dudes is a statement that goes like this: an anti-ICE protester shot at ICE but killed 2 ICE detainees.
We even had somebody a couple weeks ago pull out a rifle and start shooting at what they thought were ICE officers, but I guess accidentally killed a couple of illegal aliens in the process.
Now, here's the thing. This is an actual story, even though the comic dudes don't give any evidence for it. On September 24th, 2025, a 29-year-old shooter shot 2 ICE detainees in Dallas, Texas, with bullets that said anti-ICE. The shooter also believed he had a newly found allergy to plastic and had radiation sickness because the county in Washington state he was working in was right by a nuclear facility. This county also is where the Manhattan Project... What is this? God damn it. What I'm trying to get at here is a story about a mentally ill shooter who killed 2 ICE detainees with bullets that had anti-ICE on it has been turned into an defense against a Batman ICE piece inciting violence. It's been simplified to that point. Though the shooter seems like he never read a comic that inspired him to do this, but here's a thought I had. If there would be a argument against me with the points I'm making, it would be that if I'm judging someone for extreme thinking or black and white thinking, then would I just be doing the same against ICE? Am I saying that ICE is the definite evil here? Would that make my judgment be hypocritical? Now, I started out this section talking about how it's not good just to think in the center or always in grays. Well, that's because when you're talking about ICE, you can no longer think in the center or in the middle, and you can only think in extremes because ICE actually has killed innocent people. On January 7th, 2026, Renee Good was shot down by an ICE officer. The story goes that Renee Good and her wife were going home from dropping their child off at school when an ICE officer stopped them. This led to Renee trying to drive off with the officer in hand, killing her.
They just killed that lady right there in that car, y'all. Killed that lady in that car.
This story by this black and white rhetoric turned Renee into basically a domestic terrorist.
Now, there's no indication to that, but the facts are is that we've seen vehicles weaponized over 100 times in the last several months against our law enforcement officers. So they definitely know that the threat is real, that individuals who are trained by activists to go out and to impede their law enforcement operations will weaponize their vehicles and try to run them over and drag them and not stop.
This basically argument just leading to Democrats are violent towards ICE agents, as according to JD Vance. Hi, JD.
While also recognizing that it's a tragedy of our own making and a tragedy of the far left who has marshaled an entire movement, a lunatic fringe, against our law enforcement officers.
On New Year's Eve, a man by the name of Keith Porter Jr. was shot down by an off-duty ICE officer. Now, as reports say, the off-duty ICE officer did this because Keith Porter fired off a gun to celebrate the New Year's. Now, I'm not saying that firing off a weapon into the sky is okay, but also, this should not get you killed. These are 2 stories out of thousands upon thousands of stories about ICE's awful actions. The fact that I can just show you a video of one of these stories just kind of shows how stupid using black and white rhetoric for ICE is. Saying they're the good guys in these situations, then saying that Renee Good is the bad guy, and the ICE officer is the victim when he literally shot someone. Or hearing Tricia McLaughlin, chief spokeswoman for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, calling the man who shot Keith Porter Jr. a brave officer, when he shot someone who was celebrating the New Year's. What the fuck are we doing? It's ridiculous that I have to talk about people defending a group that kill innocent people. And it all has to deal with an art piece about a fictional character that wears tights that is fighting against an ICE officer. It is ridiculous that the Batman ICE piece had a frenzy of people coming for the defense of ICE. To have some conclusion to this point, if we are to go back to the Bleeding Cool article and ask the question, would Batman do this? If we are to think about Batman's philosophy on justice, and we to think about that philosophy in black and white rhetoric, and to just take black and white thinking, ICE would not be good. Alright. I'm gonna have some type of conclusion to this roller coaster of a video. So, I think it is not good to go on the level of violence that ICE officers have. I don't think it's good to be frustrated, to just yell at a screen, or to show your frustrations online. So for that, I've put together some charities that are fighting for immigrant rights in America, and I've put them in the description below. I also put a GoFundMe for Keith Porter Jr. I feel like if I learned anything in this video, it's not good to be frustrated and violent at a group that that is just causing more violence. Being violent and frustrated, it's not going to change anything. But all I will do now to do anything to get my frustrations out is I'll do this.
Hey, Christina, I wanna know why you're such a cunt.